The GovX show is supported by Forrester, helping government organisations perform at their best. Visit forrester.com to learn more.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of the GovX Show. I'm Tim Coulthard, Community Director here at GovX Digital, and joining me today on the show are Mark Williams and Lippy Sarkar from CloudSource, the public sector transformation experts. We asked them to come up with some ideas around the biggest challenges that public sector organisations face when they embark on digital transformation projects and programmes, whether it's technical, cultural, governance, structural, whatever it might be. What are those big things they see recurring again and again? And more importantly, how do we help them overcome them? Loads to jump into. So without further ado, let's get speaking to Mark and Lippy. So Mark and Lippy, welcome again to the GovX Show. Great to join us for another conversation. So really looking forward to this one. So welcome.
Hi, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Good to see you both. We're gonna do some exploring of the big challenges around digitizing government services. Everybody wants to be doing this digital piece, but there are some structural, technical, cultural challenges around that. And so we asked you to have a think about what those big ones are, and more importantly, what some of the solutions are so that organizations, particularly in the public sector, aren't struggling to overcome them. Because I guess with your engagement with multiple public sector organizations, you may be seeing some of the same challenges again and again. So I really want to bring those to the surface and start to understand what it is that they find difficult and how they can get some help in sort of overcoming those. So we're going to dive into that and mark your homework, as it were. But before we do that, let's set the scene a bit. I'd love to sort of introduce you both to our audience. So maybe you could just briefly explain your roles with CloudSource and also how you're particularly working with and engaging with those public sector partners that you have. So Lippy, you're new to the show, so you go first and tell us a bit about who you are.
Sure. I'm Lippy Sarkar. I'm Digital Transformation Director at CloudSource. Pretty much my engagement starts from the day one of the engagement, starting with, and we have different phases, we'll come to it, but starting with the stakeholder engagement and the discovering what are the pain points and challenges, and trying to identify within our internal team of solution architect and function consultant what we can bring into the pain points and how we can deliver some outcomes and benefits to those pain points and challenges. And finally, obviously, the implementation and leaving the best solution to the customer so that they can leverage it.
Great. So you're one of the first in to lift the bonnet and see what's there in your sort of new partnerships. So yeah, I imagine you've got some great perspective to share. So looking forward to drilling into some of those. And Mark, welcome. We've spoken before on the show, and you've obviously spoken at our conferences as well. But for those that haven't met you before, maybe just tell a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Mark Williams. I'm the Chief Exec at CloudSource. CloudSource are a public sector central government specialist of digital transformation and Microsoft technologies.
Fab. So lots of ways you're helping and working with the public sector. And so we want to sort of tease out some of these key learnings, as we said. So we talked about 6 biggest challenges of digitizing government services. And the first one, I think, Mark, was yours. And this is around, I guess, what you call disruption tolerance, which sounds interesting, but tell us what that means to you, what those challenges mean, and how you can start to work through that.
Okay, yeah, so I think one of the things that's really important is everything around true transformation program within any organization, not just government, is these things tend to be big, complex, and touch points right across all aspects of the business. And what you tend to find is that with the enthusiasm and innovative thinking, these programs will become very, very high impact very quickly. What we tend to find is if we look at changing an organization and the way that it works to innovate the way they work with technology, with data, as well as new processes, new ways of working, how we're working right now, some in office, some out of office, some self-serve out on the internet, all of that kind of thing. is it can actually be hugely disruptive. If you were to put all of that together at the same time, you have this sort of big bang scenario where if you're not careful, it can cause more disruption than it actually brings efficiency in the first instance. And I think really from our experiences that we found is around the change management part of changing a business and the technology part of implementing the tools and software and data that we need to do our jobs every day, is what we can actually do is we can move those two parts of the puzzle at a different pace. And as long as there's some concept of a model office environment that sits between those two plans, they can dovetail really quite nicely, that the technology can output into a place where the change program can take that forward out into a business.
And how do you sort of get that sense at the beginning of how much disruption or change an organization can tolerate? I mean, there's as you said, there's multiple factors all at play at the same time. So I guess, is it based on experience? How do you sort of take that test of how much change can they take, whether it's the people or the processes or the technology?
Sure. I think one of the things that we often look to in this case is around to reduce the impact, is to identify who the customers are of a program from the outset. So we'll have a concept of internal customers. There are directorates that are looking to deliver a service, and our external customers are the people out that are wanting to consume those new digital services. And what we can do is impact each of those different customer audiences separately by implementing the tools internally that innovate people's jobs, and then promoting out new digital services and do those things almost sequentially as opposed to at the same time.
Okay, so you're kind of breaking it down to bite-sized chunks as opposed to saying here's everything in one go, and people have been kind of overawed by the scale potentially of what's about to happen around them.
Yeah, just that kind of thing.
Yeah, good to. And Lippy, your first point, I think this is an interesting one because we're seeing it more and more, which is around choosing the right partner and partners. From our experience here, we're seeing much more collaboration between public sector and their sort of partner organizations, whether that's technology providers or consultants or whatever it might be. There's much more sort of collegiate atmosphere now. But how do you find those partners that have what you need in terms of the skills or capabilities and that can deliver what you need? Because that's the tricky bit, right? It's finding that relationship that really works for the organization. So what's your thoughts around how to approach that?
Very interesting point, Tim. And what we often see is the public sector looking for the partners, but there is always an urge in terms of getting some consultants, hire some consultants, and let's get it done. And which could be looking into internally how we can do it based on maybe they have some requirements. They might have identified what is the vision and where the organization need to be. But just having the couple of consultants or maybe developers within the organization, that won't help. So what need to be the right mix of having a partner is having those capabilities, because if you look for a right partner, you might have the function consultants with the right mix of understanding the pain points and discovering what are the challenges and come up with a solution for the future state model. And so this need to be within the experience of the right partner. So there may be different kind of skill sets you might be looking into the partner, whether they have gone through change management and delivered any kind of change transformation programs. And it could be expansive change transformation programs. Public sector might not see it as a change. It might be more about what we need to bring in as delivering the vision, delivering the benefit. So we need to have those kind of skill sets about having the right project management, right change management, function consultants, and obviously solution architects delivering those kind of experiences. And having an experience of working within the public sector, you might be able to identify what are the risks, appetite within the organization. And change is quite a big. Sometimes if it is not measured, it can go right or it can go wrong.
Yeah, and you mentioned that sort of mindset, and I think this plays into one of your sort of thoughts, Mark, around this stakeholder engagement and their approach and attitude to this kind of change process. And we see it, right? You know, some people love change, they love the excitement and the dynamism, whereas other people are more cautious and that their risk aversion is higher. So, how do you manage that and not only change it and for the better, so that we have this kind of approach within the key stakeholders that says, yes, this is something we want to do, and they get behind it? Because I'd imagine it's not the technology that fails, it's the culture that fails the technology in many cases. So how do you begin to work through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very good point, because the thing is with technology and change management is, especially when you're talking about business transformation, is you're not really going to succeed just with one of those things alone. And what tends to happen is, where we are making radical changes to organisations, especially within the public sector, we're doing lots of this at the moment. And what will happen is, where we do meet change resistance when implementing a transformation program, it's not necessarily that people don't really want to change. That resistance is born out of a lack of clarity around what the change is going to bring and how it is going to make people work better, easier, more efficiently. Again, it's a level of disruption that can cause uncertainty. And where we've seen the biggest change resistance to a transformation program is where the business champions are engaged too late in that cycle. And for that, what we do when we partner with our customers and we are set up these transformation programs is we establish that change network from the outset. And that change network, we help support and implement and put the governance around it to make it robust. But that change network is client side, not supply side. So where that change network is effective on the client side, it's their business champions that are the figureheads for the change, the people who really understand what their teams, directorates are going to need from them to be able to embrace that change, how to prepare them for it and warm them up to it, because when it's delivered, it's for those to then take it forwards and innovate it. So I think really the key thing in that is about leading with business change and establishing those change networks with the business champions, client side, supported by a partner that can help you put the governance and the models in place. But it really is the client side business champions that make that successful and reduce that resistance.
And I guess flagging what those end goals and outcomes are, as opposed to here's all the process and the activity that's going to happen during the change program, but actually this is how your life will be better at the end of it, which often the project becomes the all-consuming thing, and the activity and the changes are what's on everyone's mind, and you sort of lose track of, oh, there is a reason for this, there is some good at the end of this, and keeping that and having that driven through by those champions must be important as well, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Lippy, there's a question here around scale. You know, you can have very small little discrete projects that solve a particular challenge and impact people, maybe the end users of this service or a system internally, and it really only ripples out as far as those people. But then there are scale projects where it's transformational, it's across the whole organization, and I suppose working out what that is and then managing accordingly is key to that. So how do you recommend organizations get to grips with this question of scale and impact?
I think often we have seen in the public sector, it starts with a small project, or maybe one directorate and one department would like to move into digital ways of working. And often it has not been taken into consideration about the other departments might be doing the data share. So we start with one small program or small project in terms of one directorate. But when we try to do the assessment of benefit assessment within the organization, we can see the scale quite bigger. And often there is a ways of working into, you know, the old ways of working versus new ways of working, not data sharing, working in silos and, you know, working with an own directorate. And that completely goes away when we start to think about, you know, measuring the performance, measuring the organization, improving the efficiencies. And if you want to do that across the organization with the data sharing, with a common platform, that is much more helpful, but often it doesn't start that way. But when we are engaged and we can hint that that might be something you need to take on into consideration. And we have seen in some cases it does change, because it starts with one directorate and then they might start the assessment and move into something else and just start as scaling up the transformation program and start thinking about it. It's also about the mindset about, you know, the CXO team sitting and governing about where they want to be with their organization.
So the sort of success of the smaller scale project has that kind of ripple effect where people can see, oh, this worked. We can see the benefits. Okay, let's maybe start to scale that up. Let's roll it out across other parts of an organization or what have you. Success breeds success, as the saying goes, I suppose. So yeah, I can see how that would pan out. And there's another question here around how many partners you have involved. And I think this is partly about complexity and partly about sort of identifying how projects going to work. Big pots of data sitting everywhere potentially is difficult to navigate through that. So how do you sort of manage that idea around how many partners are involved in those legacy systems and making better use of all that information? Because I sense this is where the interrelationship between systems, teams, processes, where the complexity can arise. So how do we help organizations work through that, Mark?
I think really, I mean, this is something that comes up again and again, and it kind of boils down to a problem we've solved many times and seen many times within our customers. So typically within the public sector, you will find that there is a high volume of technical debt. And by technical debt, we're talking about a myriad of technologies and systems, line of business that deliver their services and the way that they work. And that technology tends to have evolved over time. So as new services were required, new systems were implemented, and so on. And these sort of this evolution of a network grew and grew and grew. So the thing there is that all of those systems collect data. They all have all that data is of some business importance and relevance and probably needs to be reported on and so on. So what you tend to have in a transformation journey is, you know, how do you get from that to where you want to be? Almost everybody knows where we want to end up, but it's really understanding where to start. So to take that data and migrate it to, first of all, a single area for processing. So we go through the extract part of an ETL process. You do need to lean on the vendors of that technology for support and create that multi-supplier ecosystem that's really important in the early stages of those projects, where you've got access to those technical specialists that are going to unlock and enable that first stage of the process. The second part is really about capitalizing on that window of opportunity where we go through the extract process and we go into transform. When we get into transform, we can then take that data, we can dedupe it, normalize it, rationalize it, improve it, enrich it from lots of different sources. And it's that process in the transform process which adds the real value. But in terms of the benefit and the cost benefit, that's further down the line where we look to build out new digital processes that are driven by data, but you're building them from a single source of good quality data that's accessible, it's probably cloud hosted, with all the tools around it to make our life easier in building those processes out, versus going right back to the original problem of somewhere between 50 and 100 line of business applications and data stores, and trying to build a new digital service out from there.
Yeah, and it's not a luxury that government departments can't press pause and say, okay, well, let's do an implementation project for 3 months. We'll halt all of our lines of business. We'll start from scratch. It's just not the way the world works in the public sector, because you have these kind of life critical services. So, and then, the old joke about, well, if I was trying to get there, I wouldn't start from here. There's a bit of that as well at play in terms of how government are wrestling with legacy systems and so on. So yeah, having that kind of route through that seeming complexity, I guess, must be a key part of that process. And in terms of that, managing the reality versus where you want to get to, Lippy, there's a point I know that you were talking about around governance versus the sort of agile approach. You've got historical processes, systems, and then you've got this dynamic agile approach in terms of digital implementation. And I'm interested in how government organizations can start to sort of marry the two together and kind of not compromise one over the other, because I suppose there's some sort of balancing act there. So what are your thoughts around how organizations can get to grips with that?
Great question. And finally, it's also about what do we deliver at the end of the day, and it's about the benefits and outcome for the organizations, how they can actually reap the benefits and how quickly can they do it. So public sector is more about, the stage gate processes, the governance around, once you have done the discovery, you get certain documents delivered and you get sign off on a certain process, and then only you can move into the development stage. But on the contrary, what Agile does is, like, you might be having a scope on a very high level and then walk through that and get some feedback and then move on so that you can actually deliver the benefits quite quickly. But we have to do that kind of in between, balancing the waterfall stage gate approach, but also with the agile ways of working. So what we try to do is bring that in an iterative approach throughout the process, throughout the onset. So basically the discovery process of the pain points and the challenges is also embedding the iterative process of gathering it. And through the agile ways of working, maybe we will be in shorter iterative cycles, we will be developing it and showing it to the customer. So it's built in from the very beginning up until the point that they can see the high level future state model, so that they can have the sign off, they can go through that stage gate processes and fulfill that criteria before we can move on to more detail level analysis and detail level requirements and building that kind of processes around. So finally, through different steps, through different cycles, life cycle within our organization, we have created that kind of life cycle which delivers the benefit, but keeping in mind of the waterfall approach that the public sector goes through. And we are here to help the public sector in that way.
Absolutely. Mark, I'm struck by remembering the panel discussion you took part in back in November around digitalizing government, and what your fellow panelists were talking about wasn't technology. It hardly came up in a sense. It was very much around what are our decision-making processes? What are our, who do we need in the room to make decisions? How do we get these multidisciplinary teams together? And it was very much around the governance and the people and the culture, because the assumption is the technology is there, the technology can be made to work, but it's the sort of the random factors and the variables are the people factors, right? Because people aren't necessarily logical. They aren't. You can't program people, unfortunately. So is that your experience that you working with government organizations is as much about managing those exterior factors as it is the tech itself?
I think so. I think that it's the thing, as you say, with the technology, we're a Microsoft Gold partner. We specialize in Dynamics 365, Power Platform, and Azure services. With that tool set, we can achieve great things, and we can achieve them quite quickly. It's something we've got a blueprint that is well versed, but yes, it's around pace, and a big factor around pace is around that decision making, and it's on the outset and the setup of a program, the right level of governance, government boards, decision makers, and the forums to approve, to proceed is massively important, and the coordination of of the people and the change management to warm people up to what's coming is, every bit, if not more important as a technology from the outset.
Yeah. I think it's one of those eternal truths, isn't it? But it's still so easy not to, if you don't keep it front of mind when a project kicks off, then you'll kind of go down the same route again and again, where the tech will work fine, but if the adoption's not there, if the adoption of change isn't there, if the changing behaviors isn't there, that's where things will flounder. So good point to sort of round things off, and a salutary reminder to all those government organizations out there that the technology will do so much, but you've got to be a functioning organization as well in terms of your culture, your people, and your governance. So yeah, amen to that. Well, we've run through 6 really strong points there around those challenges, but also more importantly, what you can do to either stop them happening in the first place or deal with them as they arise during these kind of digital transformation programs. So been great to drill into those, hear your thoughts and hear some of those kind of practical insights. So with that in mind, I will say goodbye, but say thank you so much, Libby and Mark, for joining us for a really interesting conversation.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Good to see you again.
You too. So there we have it. Thank you to Mark and Libby for joining me again. Great to see that there's so much you can do to improve the outcomes of digital transformation projects. Not necessarily surprising to hear that oftentimes it's not the technology that's the biggest challenge to implement, it's change programs, change management, cultural adoption, governance, all those aspects that sit around the technology that make it a success. If you want to learn more about government digital transformation, I'd recommend you check out the on-demand panel session of the same name that we ran at the Government Transformation Show back in November. Mark was on that panel alongside public sector colleagues from HM Land Registry, DEFRA and Innovate UK, all sharing their top tips on how they successfully implement digital transformation in their own organisations. So tons of practical learning there for you. I'll put the link in the show notes attached to this episode so you can check that one out at your leisure. That's about it for now. We'll be back soon with another conversation with a public sector changemaker. But until then, goodbye.